I'm joined here in our Washington studio by my colleague, Sean Kaligs, with more insight to share on the oil and gas industry in the Arctic. We're also joined live from Anchorage, Alaska by Gunnar Knapp. He's the director of the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Gentlemen, welcome both. Sean, let me begin with you. Talk to us about the importance of oil and gas industry. You touched upon it in your piece, the importance to Alaskan economy.
Well, to the state itself, it's vitally important, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that from our friend in Anchorage, but it's about 90% of the state's operating budget. The price has plummeted by half over the last year and a half or so, and Alaska has taken it on the chin. They've had to slash billions of dollars out of their budget basically overnight. It hasn't created a crisis, I would say, in the state, but it certainly has been extraordinarily difficult. Teachers hired, public services being cut back. But what we're seeing is really what's going to happen next. We do know that there's always been this effort to drill on land, and there's always been an effort by many, especially in the GOP-controlled House and Senate, to drill for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the ANWR. But what's going to happen offshore? Shell pulled out. Another major Norwegian company just recently pulled out. But it's such an international area. It is opening up now because of these changes. Water that people and ships couldn't navigate through, they're now going there. So the future has yet to be written.
So Gunnar, let me turn to you. First of all, do you agree with what Sean said? And also, I'd like to ask you about the kinds of jobs that people are finding in the Arctic.
Well, first to the point that Alaska's huge dependence on oil. It's true. We've got very large oil development in a part of the state somewhat near Point Hope, farther to the east, the area around Prudhoe Bay, where very large oil fields were discovered some 35 years ago. And for a long time, that oil made Alaska very rich, really, compared with other states, and brought us a relatively high standard of living. But the oil production from those fields has declined, and now we've been really hit very hard by the drastic fall in the price of oil. And so this sort of market changes in the price of oil are definitely having a big effect in Alaska and other parts of the Arctic where oil is important. So within Alaska, there's very much a feeling from some parts of the population that we need to find new oil offshore or onshore and get it developed as a way to build back up the oil revenues upon which we've been so dependent. But that's quite difficult for several reasons, and one is this low price oil environment that we're in, and another factor is precisely the sort of environmental concerns associated with drilling in some of these new places, be it the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge or offshore, where there's a lot of uncertainty about whether the country as a whole is willing to take the environmental risks that go along with that.
Sean, I want to ask you about the people of the region. In your piece, when we were watching it, I noticed there's clearly a division there. Not everybody is united when it comes to drilling because they understand it brings cash, it brings money. When you talk to people there, did you feel that divide?
Well, I've been going to Alaska reporting, I would say, for close to 25 years. And when I first started going up there, talking to the Native Alaskan groups, to me it seemed like they were almost saying, no, we don't want drilling in this area. But as we heard one person say in that story, they feel it's going to happen with them or without them. And Native corporations, an entity that's kind of hard to describe in just one sentence, but they're basically charged with improving the quality of lives, economic future for the Native Alaskan population. They have become much more active and much more successful over the years. And a lot of them wholeheartedly support drilling all through the North Slope. An area that really extends from Point Hope all the way to the Canadian border. So they are divided, they are split, because one huge spill up in that area, even though in the summer months, yes, part of it is navigable, and people from all over the world are now considering going into that area, but if there would be a spill, how would one clean that up? That's never been answered fully, and a lot of people are very concerned about that. And to get more to the point, the two companies, Stat Oil and Shell, Shell spent $7 billion to drill there. At $45 a barrel, they cannot make money. So many gas and oil companies, many oil companies are looking toward fracking here in North America. And you're probably going to see that continue to happen in the future.
Gunnar, let me turn to you. Families in Alaska get royalty checks from oil and gas industry. Why is that? Explain to our viewers.
Well, it's fairly complicated, but basically when the oil production started, Alaskans voted, and this was many years ago, almost 40 years ago, they voted to put aside some of the money in a permanent fund, a sort of savings account for the state that you couldn't touch the principal, but you could, the state could use the earnings. And after a few years, as these earnings began to get fairly sizable, the idea developed, well, why don't we share some of these earnings with Alaskans as a way so that everybody can benefit personally in the state's oil wealth. So that began about 35 years ago. The checks are called permanent fund dividends, and they vary in size with the amount of the earnings, which depend on sort of how well the permanent fund's investments do. But they have grown this year to more than $2,000 per person in Alaska. And so it's a very popular program, as you can imagine. Popular,
but some critics might consider this an oil bribe.
Exactly. It's a program that is subject to a huge amount of debate. People have very different opinions about it, but I think the majority of Alaskans would say that really this is, they wouldn't characterize it as a bribe. They would say that the oil and resource wealth belongs to all Alaskans, so that it's fitting that Alaskans should receive a direct share of it, rather than all the money going to the government. Now, another complicating part of all this is that we have this situation where the oil money going directly to the state has been declining, and yet these permanent fund dividends have been growing. So there's another sort of major political tension on whether we should keep up this program or use the money to help pay for state government.
Sean, we're running out of time. Any final thoughts on this?
Well, I just think that overall, I think what we're looking at is this is an area that more and more companies, individuals, countries are going to be looking at. The world is opening up. A lot of this water up there has never been navigated, so it's going to be incredibly important as everyone moves forward. And so many countries have so much at stake there. It's not just the Arctic nations. It's not just Alaska, Canada in that area. So I think we're going to see more and more of this. Obama administration here in the U.S. has basically put the clamps down on any future opening up of the reserves for right now. But all that could change in the presidential election this coming year. So this is something that's going to be talked about and talked about and talked about.
All right, Sean Calebs, thank you so much.